Good morning, readers and writers. We were able to start class this morning by talking about our stories again. So we've had Monday to revise, Tuesday to revise, Wednesday to revise, and your stories are really starting to shape up. So we are going to have today, we will have tomorrow to finish up those revisions, and then it's time for edits and final copies next week. So I am very excited. So as you know, we've been using My Teacher is an Alien as our mentor text. So we've been using it as a text we return to and that we're rereading for many different purposes. So our rereads have been to study the author's craft, study what Bruce Coville does. So this text, it's to be studied and imitated. We are looking to do what he does. So using Bruce Coville as inspiration. Over the past couple of days, we've been taking a look at this story mountain. We've taken a look at the background. So that's introducing our characters. We've looked at the rising action, introducing our conflict. And then if you remember, we've looked at these jagged peaks. Most of the book is made up of rising actions. So there are many events that push for excitement and then pull back, and then push for more excitement and then pull back again. All of this leads to that most exciting part of the story, the climax. So, what is that? It's the final exciting event. All of the rising actions lead up to that. So, finally, it's that event that doesn't fizzle out. The problem is finally solved. Once we have gotten to that climax, now things do need to start ending. So our problem has come to a head. The problem is solved. So now we need a resolution. We need to wrap the text up. So we don't just jump to the end. We have some falling actions. So this is where the characters solve the problem. This is where we start to wrap things up before that final chapter. And then, after all is said and done, we do get that final chapter, the final thoughts, the final words, that ending to the story, the resolution. Which notice, Bruce Coville didn't just say the end. He wrapped it up with some character thoughts and some character dialogue. So it's that ending or the final thoughts. So in My Teacher is an Alien, we have already studied the introduction. We know that's chapters 1 through 3, meeting the characters, learning about the school. Then we get the conflict. Susan sees Mr. Smith peel off his face. He's an alien. Then we start building up tension with these jagged peaks, push and pull. Our rising action, we break into the house, find nothing. Check the attic, find Mrs. Shorts. Break into the house, take pictures. What does this all lead to? What is this major climax of the story? Let's pause and chat. Yes, so this main event, the climax, we are at the band concert. It's the night of the abduction. Mr. Smith gathers the students into the hallway. They play their instruments. He takes off his mask. But is the story over yet? No, that's exciting. That's a really exciting piece. Now it needs to start simmering down into that final ending. So, what do we think the falling action could be? Let's chat. Okay, so the falling action, this is where Peter helps Bruxelm escape. They get out of that scene of the climax. Remember, Peter opens the door for him, Bruxelm runs through, and then he seals the door shut with that tool that looks like a pen. So this is where we leave that scene of the climax and we transition to the end. So what is that final scene? Let's talk. Good. So the very end of the story, Mr. Smith leaves, Peter goes with him, and we mean leave Earth, right? So we end with some thoughts about Susan. She's thinking about them when she looks up at the sky, right? They drive to the house, they get out of the car, and she's thinking about her best friend. All of this happens, it's important to note, on pages 127 to 140. So this all escalates and ends very quickly. If we look at the pages of the book, that's this tiny little sliver at the end. So let's read. I tried to pick pieces of it, but it was all just too good and it flowed so well, as it should. So we're going to read pages 128 to 140. Questions to think about. What do you notice about the pacing? How do the climax, the falling actions, and the resolution connect to the theme of determination. So I'm going to skip that first page of the chapter, and I'm going to start on page 128, where it says, my parents drove me to school. So this is climax into falling action into resolution. Let's pay attention to how Bruce Coville wrote this. My parents drove me to school. They dropped me off and went to find a parking place. I wonder how he's going to do it, I thought as I walked through the door. Will he just freeze everyone here on the spot? Will his ship use some sort of tractor beam to lift up his targets? Or will he wait until later when everyone is asleep and then sneak into their homes and snatch them? The school was fairly zinging with nervous energy. The rumors about the alien invasion had spread to all the grades. The third graders were walking around in pairs, checking over their shoulders every other step. If I hadn't been so scared myself, I would have laughed. I wanted to grab them and say, stop worrying, the alien's not after you. Hey, Susan, called Peter. Wait up. Peter was in the chorus. The chorus was bigger than the band. Almost every kid in the 6th grade was a member. They would be singing last of all. Peter looked very nice. He had on a white shirt and a red tie. His pale blonde hair was slicked down. Is your father here? I asked. He just stared at me. Are you kidding? He asked. We walked on until we came to a private place. What are we going to do? I asked. Peter shrugged. What can we do? Keep our eyes open. Be ready to call for help when there's something we can prove. Other than that, I can't think of anything. Is Bruxham here? I nodded. All the teachers had to come to the concert to keep us under control while we were waiting to perform. I figured Bruxham wasn't ready to blow his cover yet. Peter glanced at his watch. We'd better get into the gym, he said. No sense in getting in any more trouble than we have to. The gym was where we had to wait for our turn to perform. It was across the hall from the combination cafeteria and auditorium where we put on our concerts. The 3rd grade chorus was about to go on when Peter and I walked in. Get over here, you two, hissed Miss Tompkins, the world's oldest living 5th grade teacher. They're ready to start. As we walked across to the gym, I heard the 3rd grade chorus begin to sing. They had only gotten through about 3 notes when the music stopped. I grabbed Peter's arm. Had it started? Not actually. As it turned out, Cindy Farkas had fainted. The chorus teacher, Miss Binkin, stepped to the program while 2 parents helped Cindy out. Then the singing began again. False alarm, said Peter with a grin. I nodded, but I didn't feel like smiling. Suddenly I heard a familiar voice. Band members over this way. It was Mr. Smith. He was standing at the far end of the cafeteria, holding up his hand. Band members over here, he shouted. We're going down to the primary wing. Mr. Vanwick wants you to meet there to tune up. You can bet Bruxham won't stick around for that, said Peter. Not the way he hates music. Well, that gave me an idea. I might not have done it if I hadn't been feeling so crabby, but between the fact that we hadn't figured out any way to stop Bruxham from kidnapping some of our class and the fact that he was still holding the best teacher I had ever had prisoner, I was pretty mad. I decided if I couldn't beat the alien, I'd settle for annoying him. So before we started down the hall, I took my piccolo out of its case and put it together. Most of the other kids already had their instruments ready. Everybody was nervous, and it wasn't just pre-concert jitters. About half the band was made up of 6th graders. They were the most frightened, of course, especially the ones from our class. All right, follow me, said Bruxham as he started down the hall. Holding my piccolo behind my back, I positioned myself at the front of the group. When we got about halfway down the hall, I started to play a scale. Stop that, shouted Bruxham before I had played 3 notes. Just practicing, I said. Well, don't, he snapped. I had never heard him sound so cranky before. I must have really gotten to him. I began to wonder if I could break through his false front, get him to show himself for what he really was. I put the piccolo to my lips and began to play again. Miss Simmons, stop that, he ordered again. But this time, I didn't stop. Please, he said, clapping his hands over his ears. Miss Simmons, please stop. I couldn't believe it. He was in agony. I began to play louder. Susan, he howled, bending over, stop. I took the piccolo away from my lips for just an instant. Not on your life, Bruxham. Then I started to play again, the best piccolo music I knew, the solo from The Stars and Stripes Forever. Stop it, shouted Bruxham, stumbling down the hall ahead of me. Stop, stop, stop. Help me, you guys, I said. That was a big mistake. As soon as I took a pause from playing, Bruxham spun around and snatched at my piccolo, but I pulled it back to safety before he could tear it from my hands. "Take this, you alien creep!" I cried, and then I trilled him with a high C. He backed away, holding his hands to his ears. I went back to the Stars and Stripes, starting at the beginning. I heard Mike Ferran join me on his saxophone. Then Billy Gooch brought in the trumpet. We advanced on Bruxham, playing for all we were worth. We retreated down the hall, his handsome face twisted with pain. Now the clarinets were coming in, and the rest of the trumpets. Then came the drums, and finally, deep and low and powerful, the sousaphone. We sounded fantastic. Mr. Bamwick came running out of the room where he had been waiting for us. "They're playing it!" he cried in joy. "They're playing it!" But now I heard Dr. Bleakman charging down the hall behind us. "What's going on out here?" he roared. "Smith, Bamwick, can't you keep those kids under control?" "They're playing it!" cried Mr. Bamwick joyfully. 7 years I've been waiting for this." "Stop that!" roared Bleakman. "No!" cried Mr. Bamwick. "Don't stop now. Let me hear it." We couldn't stop. We were on a roll. We had never sounded so good, and Bruxham was crumbling before us. "Stop!" he pleaded. "Stop! Stop!" Adults were crowding out of the auditorium and into the hall. "What's going on?" they shouted. "What's happening out here?" We reached the big finale. I played that trill like I had never played it before. We kept advancing on Bruxham. Soon, the new Kennebec Falls Elementary School marching band had the alien cowering in a corner. "What do you want?" he pleaded. I didn't dare stop playing. I knew my piccolo was keeping him at bay. But Mike stepped in. "Take off your mask!" he shouted. "Your mask!" cried the others. "Take off your mask!" "Anything," said Bruxham. "Just stop that noise." "First, your mask!" cried the band. Even Dr. Bleakman could see that there was something weird about his favorite teacher now. He waited in silence. I played my trill again. Bruxham reached behind his head and began to peel off his face. Behind us, people started to scream. Someone cried, "What is it? What's happening?" "Oh my God," yelled someone else. "It's Mr. Smith. He's an alien." So that was the climax. We were about to super quickly read both the falling action and the resolution. So let's read. Chapter 21, Out of This World. I thought it was over, but I was wrong. Bruxham was still crouched against the wall, about 2 feet from the doors to the outside. The rest of us were about 10 feet away from him, staring in horror at his strange alien features. Suddenly, the door to the left of Bruxham opened. It was Peter. He must have run out the front doors and circled around. "Bruxham," he shouted. "This way! Run!" The alien jumped to his feet and took off as if he had rocket-powered roller skates. As soon as he was through the door, Peter slammed it shut. The rest of us started to run too. Then Bruxham pulled something that looked like a thick pencil out of his pocket. He pointed it at the doors and fried them shut. I started to tremble. He could have pointed that thing at me if he had really wanted to. He probably could have melted my piccolo to my lips. Maybe Bruxham wasn't so bad after all, I thought, as I stood with my face pressed against the window, watching the alien and my best friend disappear into the night. My best friend, I thought in surprise. But I knew it was true. Peter was my best friend, and now he was gone. Someone had called the police. Pretty soon their cruisers came screeching into the schoolyard. My mother was flapping her hands and worrying that I might have some alien disease. With all that yelling and shouting, it took the police a while to figure things out. But soon they put me in a patrol car and we hightailed it out to Bruxham's place. We were only a block from his house when we heard a roar, followed by a high whine. Then this thing, this beautiful, huge, silvery sphere with a wheel of light spinning around it, lifted into the air ahead of us. "Stop the car," I said. I don't know why, but they did, probably because the ship was so amazing. I pushed my way past the policeman on my right and stood in the road, watching the ship rise on a column of purple light into the black night. "Goodbye, Peter," I whispered. "Have a good trip." I felt as if something hard had become stuck in my throat as I watched the ship soar higher and higher until it was lost among the twinkling of the stars. The police sealed off the house just in case there were any aliens left. When they finally decided it was safe, I took them to see where Miss Schwartz had been held prisoner. I was afraid Bruxham might have taken her along, but when we climbed up into the attic, we found her sitting on the floor saying, "This is the worst headache I have ever had." "Miss Schwartz," I cried. I ran to her. She held out her arms, and I fell into them. The two of us cried for a long time, which I think kind of confused the policeman. The rest of the house was empty except for a note from Peter we found stuck to the refrigerator door. He asked us not to worry and said that he would probably come back again someday. And that was that. Things are back to normal now, at least as normal as they ever can get around here. Duncan has been picking on everyone he can. Mike and Stacy have regained their angelic reputations, though to tell you the truth, I wouldn't be surprised if they decide to get into a little mischief now and then just for the fun of it. As for me, I'm doing fine, except when I play my piccolo. That's when I think of Peter. Sometimes I go outside at night to look at the stars. I try not to think about how far away Peter is. I only remember how much he wanted to go there. I do wonder where he is and if he's seeing all the wonderful things he used to imagine when he was reading those crazy science fiction novels. Of course, I never really wish I had gone with him. After all, I've got a family that loves me. I like my life here on Earth. But I wonder sometimes what it would be like to travel the stars with aliens, or maybe with Earthlings. I've been studying my math pretty hard lately. I've kind of changed my mind about being an actress. I'm thinking maybe I'll be a scientist when I grow up. I'd like to invent a ship that would take us right out of the solar system, out to explore all those distant stars that fill the sky at night, worlds where we would be the mysterious aliens. Wouldn't that be something? So let's pause and talk. We just read through the climax, the falling action, and the resolution. What do you notice about the pacing of all of that? Or even the pacing of the climax, the pacing of the falling action, the pacing of the resolution? And how did the climax, falling actions, and resolutions connect to the theme of determination? Let's talk. So you had a lot of great ideas. We noticed about the pacing, the climax was stretched out a little longer compared to the other two. That had a whole chapter, whereas the falling action and the resolution shared a chapter. We also noticed the climax had a lot of description, everything that was happening, and a lot of feelings, everything all the characters were feeling because it was such a tense moment. And then, of course, in that resolution, it was pretty quick, but it wrapped up everything about our characters. Here's what's going on with Peter. Here's what's going on with Susan. Here's what's going on with everybody else. And here's what Susan's thinking about. In terms of determination, we know that their determination is finally paid off. They didn't give up throughout the whole book, and now they have accomplished what they hoped to accomplish. So today, you're going to be making revisions to your climax, your falling actions, and your resolution. So right now, take a couple minutes, make a plan. What are you going to do today? Go ahead. Great. I cannot wait to see these revisions. So independent work, you've got, just like yesterday, you've got some questions. So instead of rising action, they're about climax. So remember, that shouldn't take you more than 5, 10, 15 minutes. And then, of course, in writing, you're going to be making some revisions to not your rising action. I keep forgetting to change that. Make revisions to your climax. So can't wait to see your work. Happy reading, happy writing.